Yes, everyone, welcome back to the Irish Hotspur, joined by Jack and Dave here. We're going to be talking about the big Dom from Bournemouth, Dominic Solanke. He's being linked with us all of a sudden, and it's someone that maybe was in that big long striker list at the beginning of this stage of the summer window, and now we're reaching the last month of the summer window of what's available to us, and it looks like Dominic Solanke could be one of the final candidates that Spurs might be going after in terms of a new striker. He has a release clause of around 68 million pounds, which only so many clubs can even go after, so many clubs can even trigger. I'm not even too sure if this will actually get over the line or whether this will happen, but it has caused a rupture in the fan base because he's a very divisive player indeed. And we'll talk about that right now, about whether Dominic Solanke is a good enough choice for Spurs, good enough choice for Ange Postecoglou. If you can for us, smash that like button. Get in those comments below if you disagree with any of our opinions on Solanke, or if you agree with them. Feel free to let us know your thoughts on the player. But Dave, as we always do, pass it off to you here. Dominic Solanke, are you a fan of the big Dom?
First of all, this is deja vu. It takes me back to a conversation I remember having with you, I think midway during last season when we were organising our fantasy football lineups, about Dominic Solanke.
That's
You
right.
were more pro Solanke. I'm sort of anti Solanke. Look, first of all, before we actually go into Dominic Solanke, I think there is two things that we have to have a bit of understanding about. First, when you actually go to the club's website and look at the squad, we're full on the foreign side, on the foreign criteria. We've got 19 players. You're only allowed 17. And I don't think the club want to continue having to loan everyone out all the time. So, and once you take away the likes of Emerson, Reguilon, and Gill, who are all expecting to leave, it only leaves you one more spot to really maneuver in. Apart from that, I've looked at the squad list. I don't think there's too much more players within that foreign quota that too many people would actually sell on, which means we're just down to the homegrown side of the squad. That's the big area of improvement that needs to happen at Tottenham Hotspur.
Similar to the Brennan Johnson situation of last year.
Exactly, very similar to the Brennan Johnson situation last year. Some would argue that didn't exactly improve it, but, it is something that we've neglected for quite some time. So that automatically reduces the market that we're shopping in by 90%. So that's why we're at names like Dominic Solanke right now, just so people have a bit of understanding around that situation. And second of all, we had the club's greatest goal scorer ever in that position. That's the guy that whenever we're linked to a name, they're looking at it going, can he emulate that? I think we have to wash hands with. No one's going to come in here and emulate what Harry Kane done. So everything underneath that is always going to be underwhelming. Now it's just about having your own objective sort of opinion on what suits Ange Postecoglou's system and what's best as a striker in this system. Now on to Dominic Solanke, Jack. Look, to be brutally honest, I find the links very underwhelming. I think someone like Ivan Toney comes in, solves a problem, really excites the fan base, and probably gets them behind a title tilt, over the course of next season, or at least a bit more belief in it. I think someone like Dominic Solanke, I think, is a huge gamble, and I'd argue maybe making the same mistakes that we've made with Werner and Johnson. We're signing players that a lot of their goals come against teams that play high line against them. That's where they operate. That's how they're getting a lot of the numbers that they're getting. However, against Tottenham Hotspur, and we've seen last season, whether it's by design or whether we force them back, we come up against a lot of teams that sit nearly every man on the edge of their own box because of the way we play. So that space isn't going to be there for someone like Dominic Solanke to operate in and stuff like that. So that's immediately a concern to me because he's not really known for his great hold-up play, linking up with others, getting on the ball, playing others in. For me, when I look at Dominic Solanke, he's more of a striker that operates between the width of the goalpost and gets on the end of the thing by operating on the shoulder of the defender. Now, of course, when you take this into Postecoglou's system, of course he's going to score goals if we can get the ball to the byline and get it across. But how often are we going to be able to do that? We have to show different facets to our play, like what Kulusevski has shown it to us in pre-season. The benefits of having a striker that can play with his back to goal, can hold the ball up with 2 or 3 players around him, take it in, lay it off to others, play with his back to goal. And I'm just not sure that's Dominic Solanke's best asset. And that's where my area of concern comes in, first of all. But the second one, Jack, and then I'll let you in on them to maybe counter them if you feel, is I don't think he's prolific enough for what Tottenham need. When you look at the goals he scored last season, okay, he scored 19 in the Premier League, 21 in total. I think when Tottenham are looking at it, they feel that because there was a change in system at Bournemouth last year, Solanke went on to have a much better season in the Premier League than what he normally would. Forget about the Championship seasons. So I'm not really going to judge him on them. And he does have decent numbers in the Championship. But on the Premier League, the reason why he came to fruition last season is because the change in system. And I think what's the way Spurs look at it and go, well, if he scored that much in Iriola's system, imagine how much more he's going to score in Postecoglou's system. However, it is the first season at Premier League level he's hit that heights. And
Yeah.
I here with Solanke, he is one that is a huge gamble. I think personally, I think he's had the best season of his career. I think he's a one-hit wonder. I don't feel like he's going to come in and replicate that at Tottenham Hotspur. And when I look at it, he's 26. He's just entering his prime now. He's not really going to become a much better player. There's not really much more we can do to him to make him any better, I feel personally. It's not like we're buying untapped potential that we can mold and develop. What you're buying is exactly what you're getting. I'd
Yeah.
also argue, is he much better than Richarlison? Not quite so sure on that one. Back to you, Jack.
I mean, Dave, you're welcome to cut me off at some point because you probably will disagree with something I would say. And what I actually enjoyed about your analysis there was, even though I think you made it quite clear how you feel about this rumor, I think you were actually a lot more balanced than I actually expected you to be. And it's a word that you and I maybe don't try to use too much all the time to compliment ourselves. But I do think you were actually really balanced there. It made my job probably a lot harder to try to convince any of the people that might not be big Solanke lovers like I am. With Solanke, it's just that I think it started for me when Gary O'Neill first came into the Premier League, right? He took over
Mm,
from Scott Parker. I was not a big fan of Scott Parker in the Premier League with the way he was complaining about that Bournemouth team. Gary O'Neill took over, and I've watched a lot of that Bournemouth team, and I just felt like I started to see kind of the awakening of a Dominic Solanke then, where he didn't have the best of numbers, but he still was one of their better goal scorers that season under Gary O'Neill. And I liked his hold-up play, and I liked his physical play that Gary O'Neill was kind of using him for. And I start to see that maybe this guy is starting to kind of break away from the, bad reputation that he developed, at Liverpool as well as at Chelsea. And then after that, right, Iriola comes through the door. And like you say, he then goes into an entirely new system, something that is a bit more possession based, a lot more attacking focus, and also really focused on actual balls into the penalty area and kind of like service to the striker. And he really thrived on that, actually. And it just shows that maybe he has been sort of waiting a long time to play in a system like what Iriola has had, but he's also just a guy that maybe just took a long time to really find his feet. That can be the case with a lot of strikers or even guys that maybe are big young English talents that don't really hit the heights that they should have done maybe sooner rather than later. And I think he's
mm,
one of that guy, one of those guys that's done it a bit later in his career here. He's around the same age as Richarlison. He's 26. I think he's going to be turning 27 relatively soon in like the next month or two. So I see this as also an area where Spurs are kind of going after a player that isn't going to be so young that he's going to be blocking the pathway for someone like a Lancashire, for someone like a Valise or other players in the academy, but he's also still not too old or anything like that where they're only going to get a couple of years out of him. If Spurs were to get him, they could maybe get kind of the last 3 or 4 years of his prime as he's supposed to be going into his prime. I wonder if that's what they're also looking at it as is he's off the back of a great season with Iriola. He's now starting to get more confident. He's starting to kind of resemble what he was supposed to be back then at the Chelsea Academy. And I think Spurs are taking, like you say, a huge risk and thinking that maybe this guy is really going to catapult from here and push on to be a
mm,
much better striker than maybe what people might rate him as. His 22 goal contributions were quite high. And you actually look at his team in general, the next highest was 10, which was your boy, our favorite guy, Semenyo, on that team. And then the third highest after that was Senesi. So whether you
mm,
think Solanke is good or not, they were very reliant on him. And he did, handle the pressure quite well. And you could say that Spurs have a few players that were supposed to take on some of the goal burden, were supposed to take on some of the contributions that was left behind by Harry Kane. In my opinion, I think Richarlison did for the most part his job in doing that. And I think Sonny did for the most part his job in doing that. But we did need a third player to step up in that department, and no one seemed to, right? And that's what maybe Spurs are looking for here is someone that can be able to really step up under the pressure to bury the chances or to be that guy that they can rely on when putting away the chances that are being created. And one of the things I liked about Solanke was he was a guy that just dealt with a lot of crosses and a lot of kind of
mm.
long balls hit up to him, and he did quite well for it. And Dave, I'm in my era, the big dunk era, right? I've become a big Duncan Ferguson fan, watching back all the highlights, and I am a big fan of the large man type of striker. And I did find this stat pretty funny with Solanke. There's only a couple or a few players that actually won that are forwards, that are strikers, that won more headers than him last season. And all of them you would associate as being the big get it launched type of guys. Calvert-Lewin, Carlton Morris, and Ollie McBurney. Those are the only other strikers that actually won more headers than him last season of any of the forwards in the Premier League. So you can see that Solanke is a guy that if you need to hit it long to him, or if you need to hit across into the penalty area and have him win a header, he's actually, to a degree, one of the better ones in the Premier League right now. It might not be a high level or high standard, but he is one of the better ones to choose from. And if you look at it, they were second highest in the league last season for chances created from like defensive tackles in the attacking third. Bournemouth were a high pressing team.
Yeah.
And that means that that's led usually by the striker. And when
Yeah.
I watched Solanke, he did work really hard out of possession for that team to try to win tackles. And he's kind of become used to a degree of a pressing system. So I wonder if this makes sense for the fact that he is good in the air. He can kind of handle the physicality of, handling balls into the box, balls into the penalty area. If you need to knock it long to him, he can handle that. He has okay
Mm.
hold up play for the most part where he can get it under control, get turned and find somebody. He's not going to spray like a Harry Kane pass or anything like that, but clearly he is strong enough to handle that type of physicality. And he can match that with, which is hard for usually big, tall strikers. You look at the guys, Calvert-Lewin, Morris, McBurney, usually all those guys are a bit clunky. They kind of walk, out of possession when, they lose it. Solanke worked really hard for that team, and he was able to move about, get around the pitch. And so I wonder if they're kind of going for a mix of everything here. They're going for a guy that can work really hard out of possession, but can also win a header, can also be a goal poacher.
Mm.
And I just see that maybe Solanke, that's kind of the reason why I liked him to a degree. I think he kind of ticks a lot of boxes for what you're maybe looking for in a modern pressing system while still having kind of the large man, quote unquote striker
Mm.
up top. And I have other things that I would say, but I wonder what you think of that, Dave. The fact that, maybe they are kind of going for somebody that just suits the system and suits the profile of what they're looking for. It's just that 68 million pounds on a guy that just had one good season. That's where I
Mm.
don't have that's where my issue is with this. I'm actually a big Solanke fan. Is he worth the 68 million pounds? I definitely don't think he is. And that's where
Mm.
I'm a little torn on this, is I actually would like Solanke, but I don't want him for 68 million pounds.
Yeah, no, there's a couple of things there for me. I agree with you that I think he offers a lot of what we're looking for in terms of our system, especially out of position, out of possession. That's one thing I can't aim at him. He works incredibly hard. He does. He runs his absolute nuts off. But I just fear we're entering the same realm as we did with Richarlison, where, he will get minutes and he probably will take goals. But is the rest of what he does going to be underwhelming around it? And are we going to be coming back out of next season yet again, still sitting here going, we need another striker? I feel like the possibility is 100% yes. And that's why I am a bit nervous. The second thing is 68 bloody million pounds for a guy who, let's face it, right now sits as a one season wonder. Yes, that question was asked to Kane, but that was asked at 22 years of age, and he done it, all the way up, all the way through his career. Solanke's 26, and it's the first time. So the answer that you're probably going to get for that is more leaning on the yes side. And that's where that's for me. I would actually rather go with someone like Dejan Kulusevski, who's proven, anytime Tottenham have asked him to play up front, he can give us actually everything we need in this system. Everything as a striker we need in this system. Will Lancashire has come through in
Yeah.
pre-season and shown he can also give us a hell of a lot of what we need in this system. And one thing where I think he probably edges Kulusevski is the little
Mm-hmm.
runs the striker makes. I think that's one thing Kulusevski will have to adapt to over the course of the season. But if we're shelling out 68 million pounds, to be brutally honest, Jack, I'd actually rather that money go into a very good midfielder, or another option in that midfield, a world class CDM, rather than take a
Yeah.
punt on someone like Solanke. Because I do feel like you put Kulusevski up front in that system over the course of the season, I think he'll bag you 20 goals. I think you put Will Lancashire up there over the course of the season, I think he could easily bag you 10 to 15 goals across all competitions. So, I just think that money would be suited better
Yeah.
elsewhere rather than what we're spending it on. And lastly,
Big chunk of money.
Solanke wasn't at any international competitions, so why couldn't we have got this one done before preseason, brought him in here and actually let him integrate up front with the team over the course of preseason,
Yeah.
rather than bring him in 2 weeks before the season starts and go, okay, son, Kulusevski, Brennan Johnson, now work with Solanke, make it work. And by the way, be ready for 2 weeks' time when the season gets started.
Yeah.
Scoring goals is the hardest thing in football. We've seen that last season. You can't just bring in average Joes. If we're talking about winning trophies, that's why for me, all them reasons there, adding on to what I said earlier on, I largely find it underwhelming. And look,
Yeah.
people can call me maybe a bit negative or whatever in the comments all you want, but I've been consistent on this since the Harry Kane subject came around. The quality of striker really matters if you're talking about either competing for Champions League spots or going to win trophies over the course of a season. That quality really matters. So I've been consistent on this.
No, and you're right about the fact that if they really wanted this guy, wouldn't have they gone for him while the international tournaments were happening? It's a fair point. And also, we were in Japan, and he celebrated with a Naruto mask or some sort of anime mask. So you'd think that Solanke would love to have been in Japan during that preseason tour. My kind of, sort of summary points on this are just that I think he kind of, like I said earlier, he suits maybe the profile that Spurs might be trying to identify for what they look in the system. Even last season, right? Bournemouth actually had the fourth most crosses into the penalty area, and Solanke, right? You said fifth highest goal scorer in the league, was able to thrive on that type of service. And that is a system that Spurs would to a degree replicate when it comes to crosses into the box, those low hit ones, or, kind of the looping ones to the back post. He's a guy that did quite well with that type of service. And then I just sort of liked, the general kind of seeing eye test of him last season. I just thought he kind of did a lot of the sort of aesthetically pleasing things of like a big, tall striker where he was strong in the air. He had some trickery to his hold-up play, worked really hard out of possession, just kind of some of the basic attributes that I personally like, at least in my striker. And I wonder if he is going to be a bit more mobile than someone like an Ivan Toney. I don't think he's going to have as good of hold-up play as an Ivan Toney. I don't even know if he's as good of a finisher as someone as Ivan Toney. But Ivan Toney's played in a much more kind of low block, kind of, be that guy to drop really deep to pick up the ball and help your team get out from there. And I wonder if Ivan Toney would take a while to get to the fitness of being a really mobile pressing striker in the system, whereas Solanke might actually not take as long of time. I know that's kind of a really small thing to dig Toney for, but I just think if you are to look at maybe the difference between the two players, that might be one of them actually, that Solanke is just a bit more fit and a bit more mobile. And, the fact that he played for a Bournemouth team and was the fifth highest goal scorer last season, equal with Ollie Watkins, I just don't think that's too shabby at all. I understand that he's an underwhelming player to some people, but there is also that room for respect, I think, at the same time. And he played in that similar system to Ange Ball, which makes, I think, the transition just easier for him than it might for other strikers. I think plenty of good strikers like a Gyökeres, even a Toney, and plenty of other people that we could be linked with, Osimhen, whatever, would probably make a pretty easy transition to this system. I just wonder if Solanke just would have no problem at all just hitting the ground running and kind of moving into this team straight away. And last and very final point, he's actually not been that injury prone throughout his career compared to someone like a Richarlison. So I wonder if that's also some of the thinking behind it, is he doesn't actually get all that injured very much. And he's now entering what's supposed to be the prime of his career.
No, look, I think you've raised some very valid points. And like I said, I reiterate, I do think he brings a lot of what we need in this system. I think for me, the deciding factor on it is, or where I'm sort of maybe wrestling with myself is, if I put Solanke into that starting lineup over the course of the season, it's more of a hope he's going to do the job rather than I expect him to do the job. And that's maybe the difference for me. I would rather someone that I go, yeah, he's going to do the job. And that's just probably where I'm at with it.
We've always agreed on that type of thing where you can't even if you like a guy and you're still saying, well, I kind of hope, he's going to prove people wrong, or I hope he's going to do the job. It's always a bad thing to technically be saying, especially if you're going to be shelling out 68 million pounds. But let us know in the comments down below, people. Smash that like button. Dave also mentioned Dejan Kulusevski, which we'll have a video about as well. So good plug for that one. And we'll see you next time. Come on, you Spurs and the big Ange we trust. We'll find out if these Solanke news push any further. Everywhere we go.